Hey guys, this is my tutorial for timbre controllers and sensory percussion. It's intended to be a springboard for getting started with timbre controllers and is by no means exhaustive. Hopefully, going through this will jog your brain a bit and you'll be off to the races with ideas of your own. If you're interested, I've made this sensory percussion file available for $5 on my Patreon. I put the link in the description below this video. As long as you have one sensory percussion sensor, you'll be able to follow along and try these same examples with me with the same setup and everything. You should be able to watch and glean from this tutorial even without the download, but I wanted to make that available for those of you that are interested. This is the first of a series of 5 or 6 sensory percussion tutorial videos I have planned. They'll all be in this similar format, so there will be more content available for download for following along. Make sure you've updated to Sensory Percussion 1.5 and that you have a sensor connected to Drum 1. Okay, so first let's start with an obvious example, using a timbre controller to modulate pitch. Here I have a snare drum sample mapped to the center zone. Note that I have the edge assigned to the center. You could also enable a blend, but I think this is the most straightforward way to get one sound from the whole head of the drum. So here's the controller over here. I have center to edge mapped to sampler pitch. This means that as I move from the center to the edge, the pitch will move from the minimum value to the maximum value that I have set. The sensitivity setting here has a dramatic impact on the feel of this. You'll want to adjust this to taste and your playing style. In this instance, I wanted to ensure I could consistently get the sample at its original pitch for a steady backbeat, so I moved the sensitivity away from lower values. You could think of the gray bar as where the controller is going to focus its efforts, and the darker area on either end is more likely to move to the minimum if on the left and the maximum if on the right. This range is relatively subtle right now. Oftentimes, subtle is the way to go with controllers. But in this particular example, it's fun to take the max to the max, and now you have a pretty convincing hi-hat sound on the edge. Now let's take a look at using this same controller to modulate pitch in a melodic context. This is a vibraphone sample. Right now, it's totally chromatic, which may or may not be your vibe. Let's try quantizing it. Now we can select what intervals we want to be available to be modulated to. This is set for just octaves, but you could easily set a scale or chord of your choice. This is in legato mode, which the Sunhouse team uses to mean that multiple voices or instances of the sample can ring out at the same time. Imagine holding down the sustain pedal on your vibraphone. Try turning legato off to turn your sustain pedal off. I like legato mode in this context. Let's add some verb for maximum dreaminess. Here's an example of modulating pitch in a different melodic context. This sample is like 20 seconds of a fairly unchanging synth note. I have a clap sound on the rim in this example so you can choke the sound. With this kind of sample, it's very cool to add some smoothing or portamento. This means that it's going to slide up or down to the new pitch destinations, but because we have quantize on, it will adhere to whatever scale we denote. Let's check out using the center to edge to modulate the start time of a sample. With a snare drum, this can be used to cut off the attack transient of the sound. This sample has a pretty prominent thump at the onset, which is great for a backbeat, but terrible for ghost notes. With this setup, you can move away from the center of the drum and get rid of that transient and have more ghost note appropriate sounds. Try turning on the second timbre controller, which will also shorten the overall length of the sample for tighter ghost strokes. Here's the same concept applied in a melodic context. This is a cycle of samples of an orchestra playing pizzicato. Moving away from the center makes the sound completely different by cutting off the attack. I heard somewhere that the attack of a sound is the most important element of the envelope to determining the character of the instrument. Take it away, and the sound is very hard to identify. We just took a nice orchestra and made it sound like a cheesy banjo. In this example, we're using center to edge to modulate a high-pass filter cutoff. Have you ever noticed that when you hit your toms towards the edge, they lose their fundamental and it sounds thinner? This is sort of replicating that. This is one of those examples where I think it's best utilized subtly to just get a bit away from a static sample and add some nuance. Check out the difference when we turn this off. Definitely subtle, but I think the impact is significant. Let's try using the same idea on a melodic sound. These are piano notes selected at random. Try enabling all of these controllers. They enable some pretty dramatic filter sweeps as we move from the center to the edge, but I think it's nice. It gives you another dimension for artist input, which is absolutely critical, especially when using something 100% random. Another flavor of filter modulation is found when emphasizing resonance. This example features a nondescript tone sample. Cool sound, but not one that we necessarily want to hear over and over. Try turning on these controllers. They're modulating the filter cutoff here, note the high resonance, and I added another filter in the pad effects section, also with very high resonance. Now the resonance is almost a melody. Kind of experimental, but I can totally make something interesting with this. I'm totally stealing this next trick from the Sunhouse guys, using the damped edge to control a low-pass filter. I have a chopped up beat in the sampler. As I move from the edge to more of a dampened edge, it moves the cutoff of the low-pass filter. This is totally an aside, but try enabling this random LFO for some added danger. Here's another use for that same controller that's fairly intuitive, using the dampened edge to dampen the reverb, or bringing down the dry-wet mix. Modulating delay time is really interesting. Catching a sound in the delay and modulating the time shifts the pitch and speed in a wild way. Functionally, you could use this as a wild card for fills. Most likely, it will never be the same twice. You don't have to use controllers for continuous modulation. Let's use center to edge to switch between two different delays. I mapped two controllers to the bypass power icons on these delays. Note that the second controller has flipped values. We can modulate sends. I set up a pretty dramatic reverb on send 1. Playing towards the edge increases the amount of the signal sent into this reverb. Try turning on this delay for extra fun. Note how we can go back to the dry sound even while the send is still doing its thing. It's like we're freezing moments on the edge while resuming with our performance. Contrast this with our next example, in which we have the reverb on the drums channel and we're modulating the dry-wet mix. This is completely different. This is like changing the size of the room we're playing in with every note. You can also use controllers to select samples. I made 4 different claps that are successively wider. Mapping the controller to sample select allows me to select which sample I want to play based on where I hit the drum. Narrower claps on the edge, successively wider as we move towards the center. A major test in accuracy. Let's try using center to edge to modulate the stereo image. I have 2 nearly identical samplers set up in this zone with the same vocal sample in them. They are hard panned left and right, so you'll want to listen to this in good speakers or headphones. Notice how I have empty space at the beginning of the sample. We can use center to edge to modulate the start time of one of these. Playing towards the edge brings the start time of the 2 samplers to nearly the same place, so the vocals don't sound that wide. Moving towards the center pushes the start time back, widening the image of these vocals. Another stereo example. We have 2 samplers with samples being selected randomly. Center to edge is modulating each sampler to opposite extremes of the stereo field. I really like this application. If you do any mixing, imagine all the automation that you're doing with a drum. Let's use center to edge on some of the new features in Sensory Percussion 1.5. We can switch between forwards and reverse playback with center to edge. In legato mode, you can have different voices playing in different directions. Forward in the center, reverse towards the edge. You can do the same thing with drums. Here's those chopped up beats again. Forwards in the center, and you can reverse the slices on the edge. With the new loop feature, you can modulate the number of repeats. Let's do this with center to edge for some burst hi-hats. With these sensitivity settings, you can still play a rhythm the old-fashioned way in the center, but add more repeats, more burst, as you move towards the edge, which would be pretty hard to pull off manually unless you're one of those drumline guys, which I am not. I put a looping beat on the rim for your jamming convenience. Thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful and that it sparked ideas of your own for utilizing timbre controllers. If you have any questions for me, send me an email.